Hey guys, what's happening? Man, it is a tough time right now for true believers. And my thoughts and prayers are with Stan's family and his loved ones. And I'm not gonna front, I couldn't even do this video yesterday. And mainly because a lot of it was just shock at first. Because when I found out, I was working on a different video and I happened to be just on Twitter. I seen Ryan Reynolds tweet. I was like, no. But when I seen this, I immediately knew that it was official. Like, it was real. But immediately after, my girl came to check on me, see if I was okay. I'm like, yeah, I'm cool. But man, real talk, I was stuck. And I just sat at my desk for hours just looking at my Series 1 1990 Stan Lee card that I've had since like 91 or 92. But just thinking of some like the oldest memories that I've had as a fan, even though I never met Stan, but I wish I had. But just thinking back on the impact of his storytelling and what it did for my childhood and how Marvel Comics got me into reading comics, period. If you guys has been rocking with me for a minute, you already know I've talked about before some of the first comics I've ever picked up were the X-Men comics written by Chris Claremont and co-written and illustrated by Jim Lee. And this was at a time where you can buy comic books at the gas station. But when I started here, and it caused me to go back and really look into more of Stan Lee's work and dig into some of the things that inspired him to create these characters that inspired other writers so well, that's where I kind of initially went into the whole wormhole of comics. And I noticed that Stan would usually have his message to true believers at the end of the comic, but I really enjoyed when he would make it like the characters were responding and telling him what to tell us. Because at the end of the day, you go back to your friends and you like, you can't tell me this isn't real. But to rewind that just a little bit, before I started reading comics, I was always a fan of the Incredible Hulk TV show. And for me as a kid to see that evolve into the place of where they would start doing films, we got Death of the Incredible Hulk, Trial of the Incredible Hulk, we got Daredevil and Thor in the movie, it was just bananas. And at the time of seeing Trial of the Incredible Hulk, I knew who Stan Lee was, mainly through friends talking at school and having other friends who were deeper into comics than I was at the time. For me, it was mainly the TV shows and everything. But in the early 90s when Wizard magazine came out, because back then, like as comic fans, that's all we had for a good minute. And I'm not sure if Wizard is still even a thing to this day, but back in the early 90s, this was the go-to. And I know Wizard went for at least a couple decades. And I want to say they stopped and restarted somewhere along the way. But in the beginning, before YouTube and everything, this is where we got our fan casting. And in the back, it would tell you how much your comics or your comic cards are worth. So if you wanted to trade, you wouldn't get gypped. It was pretty helpful back in the day. And from what I remember, even through the early 2000s. But one of the main things I want to talk about in this video, which is mainly about what Stan Lee meant to me, but with saying that, I understand that a lot of the younger kids today, they mainly just remember Stan Lee for the cameos that he's done throughout the films and the cartoons and different series. And looking back on all that, I'm so glad he did it as early as he did, and as long as he did, and as much as he did.
There's nothing too short that I can't cameo.
And the reason why I love that so much is because he will forever be immortalized as the creator that lived among his creations, not only in the films but also in the comics. And it was always a fun thing to see because Stan Lee, like in his writing, he didn't take himself too serious. And when he took this approach, he would talk about like Doctor Strange, saying, oh, he's just an old pal of mine, and he would go on these crazy adventures and tell me about him, and I would just write him in these stories. But anytime he would do this, it would give us like, okay, Stan Lee really exists in this world. And he would just toy with the idea of, okay, these things really happened out there somewhere, and instead of him making them up, it was more like, let me just tell you this story from a close friend of mine. And then when he walks in to see Doctor Strange, you would expect Doctor Strange to be studying incantations or just doing something otherworldly, and Doctor Strange's like, no, I'm just doing my taxes. And like, Doctor Strange gotta pay too. But it was always something that was fun to see because he would find a number of ways to incorporate himself into a story, whether it was an exclusive Stan Lee meets, or if he's just a pre-existing character somewhere along the narrative. In which another example is something we talked about very recently in a video I did where we talked about Ant-Man going into the microverse, which in the films now is called the Quantum Realm, for legal purposes. But it was cool because around this time we got one of Stan's earlier cameos where Dr. Doom had threatened Stan and Steve Ditko in order to lure in Reed Richards, who Stan was close to and who he would write about all the time. And I got a link down below if you want to check that out because there's a whole video on that. But these comic cameos are some of my favorites, mainly because they're done in ways similar to the films, but in the films I feel like we got comfortable to a place to where years later we would just come to expect them, versus in the comics sometimes they would just pop up and you'd be reading along and be like, whoa, hey, wait a minute, and there he was peeking out the window talking to Daredevil. But it was a lot of fun to see, and it's something that never got old, never. And in most cases when this was done, it would be Stan's writing, and aside from being friends with certain heroes and writing about them, he would also have times where he would be abducted by different characters. And with this, Dr. Doom had to be one of the best ones, because Doom, for one, when he brought Stan Lee to Latveria, he was like, hey look Stan, I don't like how you got me looking to these people, which was mostly about him being perceived as being a bad guy. Like, Stan Lee would have so much fun with this. But one of my favorite things about this meetup especially is when Doom had the copy of Fantastic Four, like the old movie, not the old movie, but like the Fantastic Four from like 2005, that movie, Chris Evans. But when Doom is holding the copy of this movie, he's like, oh, just get him out of my face. And like, Stan was hilarious for this, because once again, he didn't take himself too serious. But what I also like about this meetup in particular is that Stan kind of confirms in a way him being under the alias of Willie Lumpkin, who had first appeared in Fantastic Four like issue number 11 as a mail carrier who delivers regularly to the Baxter building, which is pretty much what we got again in that 2005 Fantastic Four film, which was also very much like what we got in Captain America Civil War, with a much more updated version with him delivering for FedEx and mispronouncing Tony Stark for Tony Stank. But on top of this, and even going back to Stan and his influence on other writers, I always thought it was really cool when we got to see a younger version of Paul Jenkins being influenced by Stan Lee to create new characters in this existing world. And it gave us a look at Stan Lee encouraging a younger Paul Jenkins to keep trying and keep writing until you come up with that character that can flourish in this universe of multiple fantastic characters, until we see this little kid Paul come up with the Sentry. And little stories like this just remind me of your Chris Claremonts, your Jim Lees, your Greg Paks, your Jay Lees, your Donny Cates, your Christopher Priest, like your different artists and writers who have taken so much influence from Stan Lee, from Jack Kirby, from your Steve Ditko's, and have literally just kept the legacy going, taking the characters and the stories to new places, knowing that Stan Lee is somewhere watching like, go ahead, don't be afraid to do something new, to introduce something fresh and new. Because at the end of the day, as far as Stan Lee, that is exactly what he did. And look where we are now as a result of it. And I'll say, like, through the years, we have gotten a number of great characters abroad throughout comics everywhere, Marvel, DC, Image, Dark Horse. But as far as one person who has made the impact like Stan Lee, and I'm not just talking about creating a lot of characters, but I'm talking about creating a lot of characters that are huge, and I mean like household names. Like, there will never be another Stan Lee. The mind of that man was a wonder, and it is a wonder that this world will never see again. But before he left, I think it was very important that he did leave encouragement to other creators by telling them, and I quote, I used to be embarrassed because I was just a comic book writer while other people were building bridges or going on to medical careers. And then I began to realize entertainment is one of the most important things in people's lives. Without it, they might go off the deep end. And I feel that if you are able to entertain people, you're doing a good thing. And with that, I just loved how, with even how big and creative he was, he still inspired others to do the same. And he encouraged others, if you have that talent to get attention, use that to ease other people's minds, because at the end of the day, we need each other. But that'll do it for this one, guys. As far as like the upcoming films, like your Avengers 4 and Spider-Man Far From Home, I've heard that it's pretty confirmed that there's a cameo with Stan Lee for Avengers 4. And a number of sources are saying that he filmed that before he'd passed. And I've heard similar rumors for Spider-Man Far From Home, but that's something I guess we'll have to see as it goes along, if that's solid or not. Or that's something that we'll find out as we get closer to that release date. But that'll do it for this one, guys. In loving memory of Stan Lee, there will never be another. But I am glad that he left us with the best of memories. So you guys take it easy, and I'll see you on the next one. Alright, later.